Hi there. I wanted to do a video on how you can channel plasma intelligences, or what we commonly call spirits, or entities that are outside of our physical reality. To begin, I think we really need to acknowledge what humanity's past is, and how we have always said that spiritual forces, or the unseen entities or forces that affect us every day, have been talked about throughout all of human history. From the modern perspective, this could be looked at as different types of energy or plasma and how it interacts with us, the universe, and actually forms 99.9% of the known universe. These different entities, composed of mostly plasma, or all of plasma, are demonstrating exactly what it means to be conscious. Because when you understand what consciousness is, it's taking yourself, taking in data from the environment, and then contrasting yourself in relationship to whatever is outside of you. The key here is having an internal part of yourself that you're actively comparing to everything going on around you. In this way, you can think of consciousness as an individuated piece amongst a sea of other individuated pieces. And it's for this reason that a self-sustaining plasma actually is conscious and probably much more intelligent than we are, depending on the age and complexity of that structure. To begin to understand how plasma structures actually work and are able to be intelligent, we need to start to think about how a disincarnated entity that is pure energy would think themselves. Because here on Earth, as human beings and of things composed of what we call matter, we are constantly involved in the cause and effect relationship we have here with all of the surrounding matter that we're part of. And it's for that reason that human beings, and most other animals, I'm assuming, think in linear processes. We think about how we want to do this task, and while we may sometimes think about the end goal, we still have to do all the steps in order to get to what we're thinking about. However, if you were an entity that was not tied to physical matter, but more just maintaining your structure in relationship to the rest of the universe, your thinking would be completely different. You would think in terms of where you're going to be, where you were, and where you are right now. Because what's actually happening when energies actually interact with each other, and it's just energy, is that they're constantly in connection with their purest base state, which is existing all the way down to the subatomic layers of reality, commonly called Planck scale. And I don't think it stops there, because there's been a lot of evidence to suggest that quantum processes, as we call them, are actually occurring inside of plasmas. This is because plasma can form what's called complex plasma or dust plasma, and they often align themselves into long strips of this dust, creating long cable-like structures that carry energy across vast distances. And the distance between these plasma filaments, this dust, is extremely tiny and sometimes within the realm of quantum behavior. This is very similar to how our quantum computers are operating, as we use Josephson junctions to create a tunneling mechanism between two ends of a connector. If these plasma structures are doing that, they're existing outside of time and are pretty much aware of everything that will happen or could happen, where they are right now, how they got here, and how things are probably going to play out in relationship to themselves and their surrounding structures. The only downside to being a plasma being, I think, would be that you'd have to constantly be negotiating your energy with all the energy surrounding you. As we're here on Earth, when we want to interact with energies around us, we just move and plow through it. These energies that are around us have to get out of the way, or at least facilitate our movement in some way. Before we get too much further into this, I want to invite you to head over to my website, adamweichel.com, and sign up for my newsletter, where you can learn more about the plasma universe and your place in it, along with signing up for my free fractal consciousness guide so you can begin to align yourself in a fractal universe. However, I think that's where the similarities end, because like I said, we think in linear steps. And to them, that probably wouldn't even be thinking. This would just be the processes of the universe moving forward. But we're not all bone and sinew, cells and atoms. We also have a large electrical component to our constitution and our bodies. The different nerves in our body all carry electrical signals to different parts of it. And our cells respond directly to that electrical signal. All of that, nerve endings, nerve bundles, all move to the spinal cord and then the brain, where our brain is interpreting what's going on, sending signals to maintain this body, and sort of computing what it is this body is taking in and giving us a mental picture involving the five senses on what is actually happening. It's for this reason, when people try to identify what the ghost in this machine is, we talk about souls, and we talk about spirits that live beyond death. And there's actually a lot of anecdotal evidence that suggests that this is actually the case. You may or may not have heard of this, but there's a process called the death flash. And this is when in still environments, or when people are in a fractal environment, meaning that the electricity around them and the environment around them is conducive to electrical discharge, people have seen what looks like mist or glowing mist come out of people's bodies when they die. Some researchers have called this a death flash, as it only occurs when the body dies, or the process up into when the body dies, and then there's a release of this energy. I propose, and many others have proposed, that this spiritual mist, or this death flash, is actually the body releasing its bioplasma into the outside environment, where this bioplasma then moves on to higher regions of space and time, also known as higher harmonics and octaves of the frequency domain that we exist within. And if you think about how in the brain the different dendrites are separated by a small gap where electricity is constantly moving between them, what if what we call us is actually the energetic plasma that is existing between those different neurons as the brain goes about its business? And what if that driving force between the different dendrites and axioms in the brain is literally this spirit mist that's released on death? And it also involves the nerves, electricity that's flowing through our body. In this way, I believe you can think of us as plasma beings inside of a slower material body. And if you really want to think about it, and you really want to try to understand what atomic matter even is, it's actually just a very slow moving plasma that are all working together to create a multicellular organism we call animals. And while we ourselves may be plasma, and there may be plasma intelligences all over this universe, including directly in front of us, operating as different gases and different elementals and fairies, or whatever you want to call them throughout history, I believe a big part of understanding how you communicate with these beings or channel them is to understand that human beings have been calling things angels, demons, good, bad, negative, positive for forever. And I want to quickly explain exactly what that is. In my opinion, a positive entity and a negative entity differ in one way. That is, a positive entity, or an entity that has your highest good in their intentions, will take in energy into itself do whatever it's going to do with it, transmute it, understand it, work with it, then bring it to its core, and then share it with the environment. As we're a negative or a evil entity, whatever you want to call it, will take in that energy in the same process, but it will hold on to it for itself and then share only what benefits it in that moment. And I believe all entities at one point or another go through this process of holding on to what works for them and then sharing only what works and benefits them. But it's over time that entities or beings will begin to understand that they themselves benefit from releasing energy back into the environment. I think that's what a lot of these demons are, or a lot of these negative entities. They're just beings that are looking out for themselves first and foremost, and have no problem with messing with human beings, as human beings have no idea what's really going on. And when you hear people talk about discernment when it comes to spirituality or who you communicate with in terms of channeling or telepathic communications, I think this is the core point, is just understanding if that entity is trying to share with you or, take your energy and information, turn it around and then give you half truths or just outright lies. And with that, I want to do a quick walkthrough on how you can actually channel with these beings, these plasma intelligences, and begin to get inspiration, ideas, 1,000-foot perspective on what's going on in your life, etc. All by following this step-by-step process. So, to begin, the best way to understand how this is working is to look at the old spiritual axiom, all is mind. This is a Hermetic principle that says that the entire universe is one cosmic mind processing everything as it happens. Now, this idea existed before we knew what plasma was and how plasma is 99.9% of the universe, which is exactly how our brains work between these different structures all across the universe communicating with each other through electricity. And keeping this in mind, each self-aware, individuated entity in this universe, like us, a cat, a dog, a spider, a plasma intelligence, all of them are little tiny points, or big points, in the cosmic web that is the cosmic mind. So if you wanted to contact, let's say, a deity like Thoth or Hermes, one way you could do this is by getting really concentrated on the entity Hermes or Thoth, thinking about them, having the intention to contact them or work with their energetic envelope, and then begin to reach out consciously to that energy. The best way to do this is to find yourself in a silent space and to focus on your breath, to try to get yourself entrained or in resonance with your breathing and your body. So you want to create a link between your mind and your entire constitution or your entire plasmic entity. And then you want to start to begin to reach out to these entities. So you could think of imagining communication with Hermes or Thoth almost as if you're dialing a phone number. Because in this cosmic web of energetic plasmas that are conscious, this is the best way to pinpoint what you're trying to work with. You don't really need to know, hey, he's over there, I need to focus over there, or he's there, I need to focus, on the internal realms of reality. You can literally just imagine having that conversation. And this will begin to pull his energy towards yours while you push your energy towards them. You can do this with just about anyone. You can do this with ancestors. You can do this with, human spirits that existed centuries ago. You can do this with different deities like Isis, Sophia, even Jesus Christ, if you were so inclined. And while you're focusing on your breath, you want to try to relax our step-by-step linear mind and kind of just feel what's going on. When you actually let yourself go and let this contact happen, it usually is a surprising process. And sometimes you'll get impressions that flash into the mind's eye. You'll have an overwhelming feeling that something is connected with you, followed by an upswell of energy. And you can start to think of questions and get responses that seem like they're impossible for you to be getting. When you're channeling with these entities, you're going to have to use discernment and trying to understand, are they holding on to some of the information or are they sharing with you everything they can? Because this is actually where the idea that there are negative entities and positive entities that interact with us all the time actually is true. Because you have to think of it like even disincarnated plasma beings are still following an evolutionary path in which their energy gets more and more mature over time. As they compress more and more energy at their center, like everything does in this universe, by cycling energy around its perimeter and then through its center, they are constantly evolving. So when you're making contact with these different plasma entities, which people have called angels, demons, different spirits, ghosts, aliens, they're all constantly evaluating themselves in relationship to whatever else is around them. A good way to go about discerning if these entities are working with you and have your best self in their intentions, or what's best for you in their intentions, is to ask open-ended questions and then see the answers that come. And if you feel like you're interacting with an entity that isn't exactly being forthcoming or is trying to trick you or get you to give up some of your energy for itself, I've found that one of the best ways you can deal with these entities or beings is to declare that you are only interested in working with entities or consciousnesses that have your best interest in mind. And a great way to get rid of these not so favorable entities, these evil entities, is to use a simple affirmation. For instance, the one I use is, all negative entities within my field return to their center and be gone. This simple statement literally tells them, I'm not wanting to mess around with you. I don't want to feed you any negative energy. I don't want you to give me any back. I only want beings that are trying to help me at this moment. So you can ask open-ended questions like, how did the universe form? And you'll be surprised at what comes through when you do this. So with that, we're going to go ahead and do a quick meditation on how you can actually use this process for yourself whenever you want to get higher guidance or just kind of communicate with something that's not really human. So to begin, a great way to do this is to get yourself in a isolated spot. You want to try to be away from as much electrical interference as you can, as even wall outlets are constantly cycling 60 times a second, and that in itself can really mess up like our energetic connection to other energetic beings. So when you have yourself in a good isolated spot, it doesn't have to be right now or whatever, but just keep this in mind. You want to start to visualize yourself as a full energy structure. Like from head to toe, you are nothing but energy, plasma, if you will. And from there, you want to try to get your breath and your mind and your heart into one coherent feedback loop. The best way to do this, I found, is to sort of focus on this region, the region above the stomach and between the heart, and try to create like an energetic well, or like a pit that you can like use to use as an anchor. And from there, you want to try to focus on the region in your brain, as the whole goal here is to try to get your heartbeat entrained with the energy in your brain. Once you have that process working, the next step is to utilize that imagination or intention to reach out to the being you're trying to communicate with. And like we mentioned previously, this is exactly like picking up a phone and dialing a phone number. As when you imagine, let's say, a being like Thoth or Hermes, you're imagining the energy that is connected to that entity. And they can feel that outward reaching force and then return it to you through the exchange of energy in this universe. And that's when you start to ask your questions, because you'll feel an oncoming surge of energy. And that surge of energy is your clear reference that you are connected to something greater than yourself. And that you are getting some sort of energy that's coming in from the outside. So once you start that whole process, it's good to begin to mentally ask questions. You don't necessarily have to do it out loud unless you feel more comfortable doing so. But you can just think thoughts, and then you'll see you're getting answers back that you couldn't have possibly known. So with that, let's go ahead and do this meditation. If you don't already have an entity or a being in mind that you'd like to communicate with, go ahead and pause this video and come back to it when you do, because we're going to move kind of quickly here. So first, you want to close your eyes, and then remember how I mentioned that you want to try to create a sort of pit or energetic well in between your heart and your stomach, also known as the solar plexus region. Once you do that, then you want to begin to imagine or think of the entity or being that you would like to communicate with. Since we've been doing it before, I'll go ahead and use Thoth or Hermes. Once you've got a clear entity in mind, this is when you begin to hold that intention and try to just focus on your breath. You don't need to consciously keep in mind this being Thoth or Hermes or whoever you're trying to reach out to. But it's like dialing the phone and waiting for someone to pick up. Now, it might take a little bit more time than this, but once you have that connection, go ahead and acknowledge it and thank that entity for the help and assistance they gave you. Thank you. Thank you for communicating with me. This is great. Take notice of how this energy feels and try to consciously keep that connection going. Now, this would be when you can start to ask your questions. You can ask anything. I just recommend that you ask an open-ended question without a simple yes or no. As we had discussed earlier in this video, these plasma beings or entities aren't exactly keyed into our experienced reality, as they sort of exist outside of our frame of reference for time and space. So asking yes or no questions usually doesn't give us great answers. It's at this time you might want to ask questions that give you an idea of if this intelligence is sharing everything with you, or holding on to some information for itself to benefit itself. And if you feel like they are holding on some energy for themselves and not sharing everything, this is a great time to repeat that affirmation mentioned before. All negative entities within my field return to their center and be gone. You're not welcome here. And then if you do have to connect with another entity or being, make sure you have the intention. You can state it or feel it, that you're only interested in interacting with beings that have your highest good in their interest. But there's a good chance that if you keep this in mind at the beginning of this meditation, you won't even encounter any negative entities whatsoever. You can ask them as many questions as you'd like. You can ask for impressions, confirmations, whatever you'd like. As the more well-natured beings out there are typically always trying to be of assistance, because assisting us is actually in their highest interest as well. And when you're ready to come back to our 3D step-by-step reality, just remember how it felt to communicate with this being. Remember what impressions you got. Take a note of that. And then just gently release that energetic connection. The reason I said to take note of how the interaction went, what it felt like, what impressions you got, is so that when you want to connect with this energy once again, you can just remember the impressions, what you saw in your mind's eye, what it felt like, and you can use this as more of a precise connector to that entity if you ever want to communicate with them again. Because one of the less known secrets of how plasma entities or intelligences work out here in the universe is that due to the fractal holographic nature of this universe, a well-developed plasma entity actually has all aspects of all the different deities, angels, beings within itself, and it is actually able to imitate those different expressions of the universe, also commonly known as archetypes. And while sometimes a trickster entity will pretend to be, Jesus, typically when they do that, it's short-lived, and eventually you'll get to know and understand that entity that you're communicating with. So remembering the impressions you had, how they felt when you were communicating with them, or even any impressions that came to you in your mind's eye, such as what they look like or whatever, all begin to give you a more laser-focused tractor beam to that entity directly. This is actually the secret to how mediums are able to channel specific spirits. They lock on to that entity's energy and then bring it towards them. And with that, I want to say that I also have an upcoming workshop that I'm going to put on in a few weeks. And if you're interested in that, I'd head over to my website, adamweichel.com, and see about signing up for that newsletter, where you'll be the first to learn what workshops or courses I have coming up that talks about this. Some of the things I'm going to go over in this workshop are all of this plus more, looking at how plasma can be looked at through the lens of different esoteric lines of thought, like theosophy, hermetic concepts, and just metaphysics. We're going to look at what the universe is, when you think of it as interconnected plasmic structures, what we are, how we got here and what we're doing, where we're going, how this ties in with all of our religions that talk about a one God universe, and how we are directly part of it, surrounded by all these different entities, and how to understand the immense power that we human beings have, being in a physical body, but also being composed of mostly plasma inside.